Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. Hear now the word of the Lord. Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd gathered around him, and he taught them. As he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And Levi got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot fast while the bridegroom is with them, can they? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old cloak. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it. The new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins." This is the word of the Lord. So last week we read a story about Jesus calling to 4 fishermen to follow him, and today we read a story about Jesus calling a tax collector, of all people, to follow him. People don't usually look super fondly on tax collectors today or in the first century, but for this context, Levi, the tax collector in question, is not only unpopular, but would also be considered ritually unclean because he dealt with Roman money. There are many things that are different today than in the first century. But reading this passage this week, what sticks out as truly foreign is not the concept of being ritually unclean, or the technical workings of unshrunk cloth or old wineskins. No, what sticks out, and I'm sure you can all relate, is the image of Jesus having a dinner party with new friends and old, faithful disciples, interested followers, curious strangers, and even a random tax collector he just met that day. When new people try to get to know each other, there is often some kind of an icebreaker question. My go-to is usually, what would your superhero power be? On the first day of seminary, as bigger lecture classes break into smaller precept groups, the question that usually went around the room was, if you could eat dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be? Of course, anyone who has ever come across this question at a seminary before will immediately amend with the caveat, other than Jesus. I guess that this question came to mind again this week as I thought about Jesus literally eating dinner with a bunch of people. In the before times, I probably would have answered the question with Ava Gardner or Princess Grace, or maybe a favorite author. But after so many long months living and eating alone, I think my answer now would be a lot more mundane. To share dinner with just about anyone, really, would be more than special enough, no matter who it was, or where, or what was served. And maybe that's how Jesus views his dinner table, too. To be able to share his love, the love of God, with anyone. They don't have to be a special kind of person to merit the invitation. He's not looking for the most gifted conversationalist, or the person with the most interesting life story, or the person with the long resume of medals and awards, or the person with the most name recognition. There isn't a bar for being good enough to eat at Jesus' table. We are all good enough. We are all welcomed, no exceptions. If Jesus would even eat with tax collectors, who are we to turn anyone away? If Jesus would even eat with foreigners and non-believers, who are we to turn anyone away? If Jesus would even eat with Judas, whom he knew would betray him, who are we to turn anyone away? It's hard to imagine being so welcoming to the man whom you know will betray you. I don't know that I would have that kind of grace. Fortunately for me, I suppose, I am not Jesus, so I don't have an infinite cosmic knowledge of everything that is to come. I don't know what they talked about at that dinner party. Jesus and his disciples and followers and new friends and strangers, and even Levi the tax collector. I imagine that it started out more than a bit awkwardly, as the people gathered there wondered what on earth they had in common. But I also imagine that Jesus would have been quick to start a lively conversation, one in which all present could participate, and no one felt left out. I like to think that everyone went home that night with the feeling that they had made new friends out of complete strangers. I don't know when I'll be able to meet new strangers again and ask icebreaker questions about superhero powers and hypothetical dinner parties with historical figures. But I know that those conversations will come sooner than later, and I long to go back to imagining Charlie Chaplin eating spaghetti at my table. I don't know what our real dinner tables will look like when we are finally able to eat together again. But I know that that day will come sooner than later, and I long to clear the random papers off my dining room table and set places for more than one. I don't know when I'll be able to preside over a communion table again, but I know that that morning will come sooner than later. And I long to feel the tiny spikes around the handles of our ceramic communion cups that remind us of the crown of thorns. But I do know that even now, Jesus calls us to follow him, even though the act of following looks different than it did in the first century, even though the act of following looks different than it did a year ago. I know that he challenges us to find the people on the margins and make them feel welcome. And I know that whether or not we are able to physically eat together at Jesus' table, we are still wrapped up in his love. Whether or not we are able to physically be together, Christ still came into this world for everyone, and everyone is welcomed at his table. Baptized or not, a member of this church, another church, or no church at all, a stranger, a wanderer, a tax collector, a sinner, or a guest. If you wonder whether you are welcome, you are.